Good evening. My name is Michael Charles, and I teach in the History and Social Studies department here. It's a real honor to share tonight, in part because I feel as though I have a special bond with the class of 2014 because we entered high school together. 4 years ago, I joined the faculty at Lancaster Mennonite, and most of you also began high school 4 short years ago. Sadly, next year, I will undertake my 5th year of high school, and I'm not aware that anyone here tonight is going to share in that opportunity. So I'm forced to go on alone. And I certainly don't suggest you attempt to beat Mrs. Banks' 36 years. In fact, I feel so close to your class that at times I've even felt as though I was a member of it. For instance, this past spring, when Jesse Schatz accidentally gave me the note that was supposed to ask Christy Bender to the junior-senior banquet. Poor Jesse had printed out a very thoughtful little invitation for Christy, and he had masked it as a document for the student council. But as things turned out, the document was given to me as the student council advisor, and I opened it up to learn just how Jesse felt about me. Of course, I was deeply flattered until Jesse claimed that it was all a mistake and he tried to rescind his offer and backpedal. But I'm holding him to it. Jesse, I'm still waiting for my magical night at the Spooky Nook. We're like this past January when Christian Lopez in economics class and I realized that we shared the same winter coat. Now, I need to admit, nothing has ever boosted my confidence as a teacher like discovering that I wear the same clothes as Christian Lopez. It really doesn't get any cooler than that. And I again felt like a member of your class when I spent the better part of this past week with a group of you out on the Appalachian Trail. Let me tell you, the line between teacher and student begins to blur significantly after no one has bathed for over 4 days. It became even harder to distinguish when we were all ordered out of our tents in the middle of the night by a group of park rangers for a substance abuse screening. Unbeknownst to me, a group of our size at this particular campsite signaled a red flag for the Park Service. Fortunately, they were pleasantly surprised by the nature of our group. Unfortunately, I had been so soundly asleep that my fellow hikers haven't let me forget how I stumbled out of the tent in a state of delirium to greet the authorities in a manner that could have caused them even more suspicion. But tonight is an honor for another reason, and that's because I get to share alongside of someone who has made a significant impact in my life, and that is Mrs. Janet Banks. And in order to frame my thoughts this evening, I'd like to tell a brief story. Not too long ago, I was your age, and I actually was a senior in high school. And when I look around, and I want to be clear that I was not the student in the picture that she showed of her hair. And it was not that long ago. And when I look around, many of you remind me quite a bit of myself at that point. I was having a lot of fun in high school. I loved my friends. I cared considerably more about my social life than my studies. I was committed to my faith, but was still wrestling to figure out what exactly it meant. And prior to the 12th grade, I had thought very little about what I would do after high school. As a result, when senior year hit, I started to feel insecure about my future. I exhibited a sense of optimism, but I was privately anxious about what lay beyond graduation. I didn't feel exceptionally good at anything, and I tended to compare myself with friends who stood out as students or athletes or musicians, and who had clearly defined plans for their future. I remember feeling average. I think that graduations tend to be events where we celebrate accomplishment and exceptionality and the certainty of our plans, and I think there's some value in that. But tonight I'd like to provide a moment for you to all own your insecurities. I want to allow you to acknowledge the doubt and the fear that comes with facing an unknown future, and to encourage you to be open about these feelings, and to state clearly that you're not alone. I want to permit you not to have your act together yet, because this is very much how I felt as a senior, and as everyone on my mini-course can testify, I'm still working on getting my act together. But one day during my senior year, Mrs. Banks pulled me aside after an English class and told me she saw gifts in me. She urged me to become a teacher. It was a simple 30-second conversation, but it was a gift that altered my course. And as I think about what it was that Mrs. Banks gave to me that day, it wasn't just that she gave me a vocational direction, but Mrs. Banks' encouragement placed an imprint of hope on my life that left me feeling like I had something to offer. For that, I will always be grateful, and I'd like to take this opportunity to publicly thank you, Mrs. Banks, for giving me a profound encouragement at a time when I needed it. I tell this story not just to thank Mrs. Banks, but to communicate to you my prayer for you as a class. As you graduate, my desire is that, like Mrs. Banks did for me, you will also be people who leave imprints of hope on the lives of those you touch, along whatever path you may choose. And I have reason to be optimistic about this because I've observed you practicing it over the past 4 years. I've seen it in the way you treat each other, how you encourage one another and build each other up. I've seen it in the way your class established a community service club that has fed the hungry and clothed the homeless. I saw it this past fall when after being confronted with stories of violence, you organized a clothing drive for the millions of Syrian refugees displaced by civil war. I've seen it in the way your friendships cross-pollinate among beautifully diverse circles of nationality, color, family origin. I see it in the decision-making process behind many of your future plans, as many of you pursue serving and helping vocations. I saw it this past week on the Appalachian Trail, in your kindness to each other and even to the park rangers and to me for getting you in this mess. In John chapter 13, Jesus says that we will be identified as his followers by our love for one another. As you graduate, my prayer is that you will proclaim the kingdom of God by demonstrating this kind of love, that you will leave imprints of hope on the people you encounter, and that by doing so, many of your own fears will begin to be transformed. It's been my wonderful privilege to walk beside you during these past 4 years and to grow with you. I will miss you all greatly, and I invite you to remain connected to us after you graduate. And Jesse, my room number is 105, whenever you're ready to deliver. Finally, before I give up the microphone, I want to ask everyone to join me in acknowledging one of the people who has deeply impacted my life, the lives of hundreds of other students over the years, and who happens to be retiring this year, Mrs. Janet Banks.